As you can see, human race, specially created. Now, I'm quite positive that most, if not all of you, would say, well, yes, but it would be a very short presentation if we called it quits there. So I'm going to talk a lot more about it. But sometimes I want to start my presentation with an anecdote. We get people right into our ministry, be it an anecdote or a testimony, and I want to start with the talk from anecdote from Seth, who was from the United States. And he wrote the following to us. He said, the first day of his biology class, my professor said he would be teaching from an evolutionary perspective. How does it feel to know you came from a monkey? It was a rhetorical question. No evidence was considered, and he didn't let anyone answer, and none did. I felt like I was the only one who was upset with the comment and was too afraid to say anything. Well, Philip and I have been in the ministry for a few years. Philip, a few more years than me. But if we were in the classroom, we might have said something like, Sir, I perceive that you are an evolutionist, but informed evolutionists wouldn't say that we descend from monkeys. They would say we share a common ancestor with monkeys. So you see, a lot of people do believe in evolution, but not everybody is very well informed. And so hopefully we can look a little bit at what creationists believe, first and foremost, and maybe contrast it with others' beliefs. But before we really get into it, I want to explain to you a little bit about what Creation Ministries is. We are an information providing ministry predominantly to the church. We go where we are welcome, such as churches like this, and people get invited to come and be with us. And we share about our beliefs, biblical creation, and we do that with a talk. We have resources in the back. There's some leaflets and on the pew behind Philip that you can take for free if you want. All for the message to go out. But the most important thing is that Christ is Lord and the gospel needs to go forward. So we do welcome, if you are not a believer, if you're not a Christian, you're most welcome to be here tonight as well. And this, what I'm showing you now, is one of those ways to connect with us and with the information. It's a free email newsletter. It comes fortnightly. With every so often you get a special announcement. For instance, if you put your postcode, then we would let you know when we're in the neighborhood again. Not per se this church, but if we're in London somewhere. So, if you think that could be for me, then Philip's going to pass around the clipboard. You don't have to put your name or email down. Just let the clipboards find their way to the back. Whether you put your name and email down or not, that's up to you. It's voluntarily. If you do and you don't like it, then just hit the unsubscribe button. No hard feelings at all. So, we're going to move on. As the clipboards find their way, we're going to continue with the talk. And I'm going to take you back almost to school days by starting off with yet another question. But don't worry, there isn't a test paper at the end. But it's something that I want you to mull over during the presentation. And we'll come back to this at the end. And the question is, can you marry your relation? And the answer is multiple choice, so that always narrows it down often. Yes, no, probably, or only after counseling. Well, I'll let you think a little bit about that, but let's move on to a bit of biblical background, because we do believe in the Bible. God's Word is the most important book, the best book ever written. If you only were to read one book, I would recommend read God's Word. Now, we're going to start off with one man. I'm not going to hand out points for guessing his name, but you guessed it right. It's going to be Adam, isn't it? And Adam was directly created by God. So Adam didn't have a mummy and a daddy. He was just created from the dust of the ground. God can do anything, and this is how he chose to make Adam. The first man was from the earth, a man of dust. Now, like Adam, all of us will return to the ground or to the dust, because we are like that. So 10 out of 10 people in this room and outside of these walls will eventually pass away, will eventually die. That is, of course, unless Jesus returns prior to that happening. That's a bit exceptional. But going by the statistics, it is true 10 out of 10 die. Adam was a special man in that he was created from the dust of the ground, but he was also given dominion over the earth. Now, some translations use stewardship, or he was to rule over the creation. He was given the task to head over the creation and make sure that it went well. But did it go well? Well, not really, because Adam spells bad news. Adam had been given one instruction, one clear command by God. And he said, God said to Adam, of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat. And I think we all know how that story went. He did eat from that tree. And that brought death. And this is a point where I want to dwell a little bit longer at, because this is crucial. Philip and I are confronted with all sorts of people with different views about Genesis, and of course our colleagues and others around the world. And by and large, this is the point where we have a big conflict, because the wages of sin, as Romans 6 tells us, is death. Sin is disobeying God. And Adam clearly disobeyed God with this one instruction that he was given. He ate from the tree. And that spelled death, because that brought death into the world. Prior to that, everything was great. Everything was perfectly good, because Genesis says 6 times, it was good, it was good, it was good. And the final verse of that chapter concludes the 6 days of creation, and it says it was very good, exceedingly good, perfect. When God does something, he doesn't cut corners, does he? He does it perfectly. So Adam was given stewardship over a perfect creation. Everything was working just the way God intended. But it was his disobedience that brought death and a curse. But Adam and Eve, they didn't drop that on the spot. Now, spiritually, yes, they were separated from the Lord immediately. But physically, they continued to live on for a while, actually. For over 900 years, Adam is recorded. But he and his wife had children, who had children, who had children. And here you see some very famous names in that family line that takes us all the way up to Jesus. Now Jesus, and we're going to now jump a little bit forward into the New Testament, that is, of course, the good news of the gospel. Who is Jesus? Well, the other book that begins with "in the beginning" says, that's the book of John, in the beginning was, the Word was God. Jesus, this is talking about. If you read on in John 1 and you get to verse 14, it becomes pretty clear that it is speaking about the incarnate Lord. So Jesus is, of course, God, but he was born of Mary. He was the God-man. He was just born as a little baby. That's the time that we're now really heading up to. For a lot of people, including people in my more distant family, they still see Jesus as a baby. But he's much more than a baby. He's the roaring Lion of Judah, but I digress. But he was born of Mary, and he went to the cross, where he was, of course, crucified. Jesus is sovereign over everything. He is the creator. You know, when creation happened, it was the Trinity. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. They were all involved in the creation of the heavens and the earth. Now, unlike Adam, Jesus is perfectly obedient. He is without sin. Jesus did not obey the Father, and therefore he is the only one that can atone for our sins, for my sins, for your sins. Nobody else will do. Jesus is called a life-giving spirit. So I've spoken to you about Adam bringing death, but Jesus does the opposite. He's a life bringer, and he is called the last Adam. So he's directly linked to the first Adam that we read about in the book of Genesis. And so people who say, well, the Adam in Genesis, that was just a myth or a fable, that wasn't true, that undermines the gospel of Jesus. Now, Jesus is with us. Emmanuel, that's certainly in one of the carols that I'll probably be singing in the next few days. And now I'm going to take you back into the book of Genesis, because we weren't quite done there yet. We read about a flood. And we read about Noah, who found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Some translation says he found grace in the eye of the Lord. Now Noah was married to Mrs. Noah. I don't know her name. They had 3 sons, each of whom was married to. And so the people that went on the ark was a total of 8. And it says there in 2 Peter 2, God did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. Notice those 2 words there, herald, righteousness. Noah was preaching. He was warning people of the danger that was coming. He had been told by God, there's going to be a destructive flood, build an ark. He was given 120 years to do so, and I believe in that time he was a faithful preacher and telling people, you need to come into this vessel, into this ark, because outside is going to be destruction. He only had 7 others with him. So if you're involved in going out on the streets and witnessing and preaching, don't be discouraged if everybody seems to shake their head and walk on. I bet you Noah was discouraged 1 or 2 times in his century-plus preaching, but yet he was named a herald of righteousness. So carry on, faithful servant. But speaking of the flood, the Bible is not the only source that talks about a global deluge. There are many traditions around the world from people groups that hold similar accounts of history, that have traditions. And I'm going to explain to you what we see here. We see a table, or a matrix if you like, with along the top, going from left to right, there are different people groups from around the world. There are many more, but there wouldn't be enough space on the slide, or it would be so minuscule nobody could read it. Over 500 accounts of flood traditions. On the left-hand side, going from top to bottom, you see components of the biblical narrative of Noah's flood. So we read, for instance, a man in transgression, divine destruction, a favorite family, and so on. And where these two meet, you see either a red triangle or a green square. That means that there is either partial or complete overlap with that tradition from that people group with the biblical part that we find in Scripture. And I just want to read to you 3. There are many more accounts that we could cover, but I just want to read 3 to you. And I'm going to start with the Hawaiian legend, which speaks about one good man left in a wicked world. And he made a great canoe to save the animals and his family, and his name was Nu'u. Now I'm going to go to the Chinese, who report the entire land was flooded. It talks about Fuhi escaping the flood with his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters. There's a temple that has a wall painting depicting a dove with an olive branch flying towards Fuhi's boat. And thirdly, I want to tell you about the Toltec Indians of Mexico. They relate that the 1716-year-old world was devastated by a flood covering the highest mountains. Now, I particularly like this account because 1716 years is actually very close to the years that you get when you add the numbers from Adam to the flood coming. It goes on to say that a few men escaped the flood and afterwards built a great tower for a safe place. Languages became confused and people scattered. How can this be? How can it be that people from all over the world have things so relatable, so familiar to those of us who read Genesis 6 through 9? Well, we already heard it mentioned. It has to do with this, the Tower of Babel, which we read about in Genesis 11. In 11 verse 3 it says, and they said to one another, so this is the people after the flood, building a city and a tower in its center, staying together. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Now, you will have seen some words I put in bold there. Why did I do that? Because it talks about us, ourselves, and we. The people there were very focused on themselves. They were doing their own thing, and they were futile in their thinking. Why? Because they weren't listening to God. Just like Adam didn't listen. Well, maybe he listened, but he certainly disobeyed. But people were doing their own thing. And that was silly. Well, of course, you can't build a tower to reach to the heaven. It's kind of funny that the biblical text said that God came down, maybe came down to their puny little tower. But even so, were they building a tower for a safe place? Safe place from what? From another global flood? Well, if they had listened to God, they would have listened to the covenant that he was making, that he would never again flood the entire world. And the rainbow that we see should be a reminder to all of us that that is related or associated with God making that promise. But of course, these people were too busy building their tower and thinking about themselves. Now, Babel is of course known for the language confusion. At the time, the whole earth had one language and the same words. Now, personally, I believe that was Hebrew. If other people have different views, that's fine. I'm not going to die on that hill. I want to just talk about the name that's associated with Hebrew, which was Eber. Now, Eber was a descendant from Shem, who was one of Noah's sons. And to Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And we believe that this division had to do with languages. Therefore, his name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. Imagine that you're going to a street party, and all of a sudden everybody else doesn't understand you, and you don't understand anybody else. It seems like they're all speaking a different language. My suspicion is you won't stay very long at that street party, because it won't be much fun probably, and you go your own way. Now, just in case you worry, God did not separate mothers from their children, or fathers from their wives. They were sent in groups by their clans. So he split up some families from other families, but no families were split up. Now, a little bit of Bible trivia to do with language. We're going to think about the longest chapter in the Bible, which is Psalm 119. It has 176 verses, and it's called an acrostic. Now, what is an acrostic? An acrostic is a composition in which certain letters in each section from a word or words. Now, all these verses are split over 22 paragraphs, sometimes called stanzas, with 8 verses each. It just so happens that Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. And yes, you guessed right, each paragraph starts with the next letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Now, I am from the Netherlands, and we have a national anthem, as you know. That's that song that we sing at the World Cup that we're not going to win. You remember that? Our national anthem is actually a very Christian song. Now, the first verse that we normally sing doesn't give much away, but I want to give you the 6th stanza. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. I'm just going to read it out to you in English. And it goes like this. A shield and my reliance, O God, thou ever word, I'll trust unto thy guidance, O leave me not ungirt, that I may stay a pious servant of thine for aye, and drive the plagues that try us and tyranny away. In case you are wondering, well, what is that acrostic? What does it spell? It spells William of Orange. Now, I've told you the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. We're going to talk about the genetic alphabet. The genetic alphabet has 4 letters, A, C, G, and T. And they're the names of the 4 nucleotides, if you're interested. Like I said, there's no test paper, so don't worry, it's just a little bit of trivia. Now, in case you are wondering, an alphabet with 4 letters, that's pretty rubbish. How good is that? That's not good at all. Well, I'm going to give you 2 examples of alphabets with just 2 letters, and I think all of you will be familiar, well, certainly with the second one, but I think people will know the first one as well. You recognize what this is? That's the Morse code. So a sound, a short bleep or a longer bleep, and then you spell the letter A. Now, a very clever man, who you will see his picture on the next slide, he said, well, it's maybe not a binary alphabet, it would be a ternary 3, because you've got a short sound, a long sound, and a pause. So anyway, moving to the next example, all of you will have this going on in your pocket, or if you're a lady, in your purse right now. If you have one of these evil things, then you've got this going on. Any smartphone or anything that's a computer has software on it, and no matter what language that software is coded in or programmed in, underlying it, it just revolves to transistors being either on or off, a 1 or a 0. These are bits, binary digits. So that's essentially a 2-letter alphabet. And we all know the fantastic things you can do with just 2 letters, as long as you organize them in a certain way. That makes a nice program. An alphabet with 1 letter is useless. I'll give you that. Because you can't make variation. All you can do is repeat the same character until infinity. Anyway, back to the code of life. The 4 letters A, C, G, and T. Not just in humans, but animals as well, and plants. We have genetic information. And we call this DNA. It's a double helix. If you fancy the word, I imagine it as a very tall ladder. A ladder that goes up and it's spun around its axis a little bit. And these rungs of the ladder are called base pairs. So you see A is connected to T and C is connected to G. I forgot to tell you, by the way, I also do a bit of mind reading. So some of you currently are thinking, I wonder how tall this ladder is that he's talking about. Well, the amount of rungs on this double helix ladder is approximately 3 billion steps. Now that's a large number. We all know that is true. Let me give you an analogy. The English Bible has approximately 3.5 million letters in it, depending on your version, but approximately 3.5 million. You would need to make a stack of 800 Bibles on top of each other to get to 3 billion letters. That amount of information is in each of the cells in your body, well, not the blood cells, but your cells, of which you have trillions upon trillions. So those trillions upon trillions of cells that are part of your body, each of them contain the same amount of information as 800 Bibles. Just take a second to praise God for the one who made it. That is awesome. Our information storage, clever as IT people are, doesn't come anywhere near that kind of information density. Nowhere near it. And this man that I said I would show you his photo, he has something to say about the information density. This is Werner Gitt. He's now retired and probably getting on very old. He was the director and professor of the Information Technology Institute where he worked in Germany. And about the code of life, so that's for people, but animals, plants too, he said, from an engineering point of view, the code system used in living organisms is the best of all possible codes. He didn't say, oh, it's a very good code. No, he said, it's the best. How can he say that? Well, for starters, he was the professor of the Information Technology Department, but he looked at the various parameters that you can work out in this genetic code that we've been talking about. He said, every time I changed one of the parameters, the information density dropped. I never got it to go up or to become more dense, which means it was indeed the best information storage system. No surprise really, because it was made by the one who gave us his word, the creator of the heavens and the earth. Of course it's the best code. Makes sense if you believe in the God of the Bible. Now, believe it or not, genetics is a little bit linked to the most asked question that CMI got. That is not entirely true. The question probably didn't come up in this country so much, but maybe more in other countries such as America. But one of the questions that creationists or Christians sometimes get asked by a skeptic is, well, who was Cain's wife then? Because we've all read the Bible, and if you keep going a few chapters in, it says, and Cain knew his wife. Hang on a second, where did she come from? That's where the skeptic thinks, aha, I've got the Christian, they won't have an answer for that. Well, the sad thing, of course, is that the skeptic didn't read beyond chapter 4 of the Bible. He should have really read the whole thing, but certainly the next chapter, because if you get asked questions about biblical characters, where's the best place to go for answers? I suggest go to the Bible. And we read in the book of Genesis chapter 5 verse 4, the days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Yes, we are familiar with Cain and Abel, and then came Seth. That's the 3 names given. But he had other sons and daughters. So in case you still not worked it out, yes, some of the early living people, and much later on as well, they married a sister. Now, before you come off your seat and start attacking me, I am very much aware there is laws against that in this country and most countries actually. But bear with me for a few seconds because we're going to find out what's going on here. In Leviticus, so that's the book that Moses wrote, God said to Moses, "None of you shall approach any one of his close relatives to uncover nakedness. I am the Lord." Now, we're all adults here, uncovering nakedness. I think you can work out what that might mean. And it was no longer allowed that people that were very closely related to be uncovering nakedness, to get intimate. And I am the Lord. Not that it needs a stamp of approval, but I think this is a very important thing that God did. Now, what has this got to do with genetics, you might wonder? Well, thousands of years later, well, let me finish the slide first before we get carried away. None of you shall approach any one of his close relatives. Moses was told this. Moses is approximately 1400 BC, give or take a few years. We believe, as biblical creationists, the earth was created approximately 4000 BC. So that still leaves over 2500 years until Moses got to pen these words. What happened in that time? Well, we have people like Abraham, for instance, marrying a half-sister. We have Jacob marrying two of his cousins. And if you dive really deep in the book of Genesis and the relationships, you find that it was pretty common that close relatives were marrying and having children. So I could ask, why are Abram and Jacob never questioned by the skeptic? Well, I already told you, usually the skeptics stop reading after chapter 4, so they wouldn't even get out of the book of Genesis. Yeah, let me continue till it gets really relevant. Here we go. The reason why that was important, that God said, you shall no longer have close relationships, is because God knew something that scientists wouldn't discover until thousands of years later. Of course, you know, God knows everything, and we people, we just trail along and get with the program. But basically, people have genetic mutations. Those are copying errors of a perfectly good code. It's not so perfect now anymore, but those copying mistakes accumulate over time. Think of it as a piece of paper that you're going to copy on a photocopy machine. And then you take the photocopy and you copy that. Does it get any better? No. If you keep going, it gets worse and worse and worse. It's a bit comparable to that. So God knew this and said, people that are closely related will have likely the same copying mistakes in their genes. And mom supplies a piece of information and dad, and you get two faulty copies of the same information. That would mean that the child will likely express a fault or a problem or a disease. Whereas if you have somebody with the bad copy, marrying somebody further afield, away from their close family, who very well might have a good copy, most of the time the good copy overrules the bad copy and you have a healthy child. So God knew this, and that's why he said, no longer shall you be doing that. Now here you see somebody who used to be very clever about genetics, and this man was quoted saying that we, you, me, Homo sapiens, were genetically inferior to caveman. What does he mean with caveman? He's talking about an ancestral type of human being that lived hundreds of thousands of years ago. But he's saying that you and I, genetically, we are inferior, or we are worse off than said caveman. Well, that's interesting. I thought with evolution, and he is an evolutionist, things were going upwards and onwards, better and better suited for their condition, for the environment they live in. Let's look at another evolutionist. This is Alexei Kondrashov, Moscow State University, and he said something similar, or something to the same effect, that there is no human geneticist doubts that mankind is degenerating, or getting worse, going downhill. And he put the follow-up question down as, why aren't we dead 100 times over? Now he's speaking about human beings here. We could easily say this is about animals. Why aren't we 100 times dead 100 times over. My answer to him would be, well, Alexei, that's because people have not been around for as long as you think they have. This man would probably believe that Homo sapiens has been around for a few 100,000 years. Prior to that, they evolved over 6.5, 7 million years from some ape-like ancestor who would also have been accumulating genetic mutations, and that prior to that, ultimately, you get where I'm going with that? It would be accumulation over millions, if not billions of years of copying mistakes. But here's a creationist who, like Philip and I, would believe, well, human beings have been around for about 6,000 years, maybe a little bit over. And this creationist, so the previous two were evolutionists, this one says, what we observe in research laboratories today is DNA slowly deteriorating, not new DNA evolving. This means we actually observe the very opposite of evolution, because evolution in many ways is taught as everything is getting better adapted to their circumstances, to their environment. But quite frankly, it's all going downhill, and the scientists know it. So does that mean we can say something about the genetics of the past? Well, I think we can. Let's have a look at this slide. We're going to look about our ancestor, and we'll start with the ladies first, because that's only good and proper. Here you see a depiction on the right-hand side of a cell. It looks a bit like a jacket potato, but it's a depiction of a cell, like the cells we were talking about that carry all the genetic information. Now the blue bit there, you see, that would be the nucleus, or where our genetic information is stored, whether you have blue eyes or brown eyes, whether you have blonde hair or brown hair or no hair. All good and well, but that's not what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about this thing that's enlarged here on the left-hand side, which is called a mitochondrion. They are like the battery packs or the energy houses of the cell. There is tons of stuff going on in the cells, and all these reactions need energy. Those pieces of energy are provided by the mitochondria, which have their own DNA, their own genetic material. This genetic material is called mitochondrial DNA. There's 10 points for being original name. And this is passed on through the maternal line. So every single one of us in this room and outside of this room, we have inherited the mitochondrial DNA from our mums. Okay? Whether you're a boy or a girl, doesn't matter. Now there were secular scientists, that is people who don't profess Christianity in any shape or form, wanted to find out more about this mitochondrial DNA. They went traveling around the world to various people groups, sampling their DNA, and they came to a conclusion that all people alive today descend from one female ancestor. And they even called her mitochondrial Eve. They don't necessarily believe in the biblical Eve. I think it's a very good name though. No, the biblical Eve, I'm going to show you a picture, would be looking something like this. So I've got purple ladies and blue men, and at the top there, let's say that represents the biblical Adam and Eve. The white lines represent the passing on of this mitochondrial DNA. Now, if you've been paying close attention and you say, Lucian, you should have drawn a white line from the mother to the sons as well. You're right, but it would be a very messy slide and very busy. So I've only drawn the lines to the daughters here. And so each daughter passes on the mitochondrial DNA to the next generation. But hang on a second, say those secular scientists, that's not the full story, that's not the whole picture. There were many other people living at those same times and mothers that had offspring too. And they would be passing on. The unfortunate situation is that all those other family lines went extinct. They were dead ends. They stopped existing. And only the people that came from this one woman are still alive, which is you, me, and everybody else in the whole world. So that's what the evolutionists or the secular people believe. But this is what we would believe. Now, journalists talk about this mitochondrial Eve. Closest link to Eve, our universal ancestor, a man who died 315 BC in southern Africa as the closest relative yet known to humanity's common female ancestor, mitochondrial Eve. So the scientists believe it, the reporters report it, It's not really found in the mainstream media or in the textbooks much, is it? Anyway, let's move on to the guys then. We're going to talk about the men now, and here we see a depiction of the 23 chromosome pairs that we possibly are familiar with. And the 23rd chromosome that you see at the bottom right is your sex chromosome that determines whether you're a boy or a girl. So women have XX, two X chromosomes, and men have an X and a Y chromosome. And it's this Y chromosome that we're going to talk about. This Y chromosome is, of course, passed on from father to son. So sorry, ladies, you don't have a role in this to play. Father to son, the Y chromosome is passed on. Again, secular scientists wanted to find out more about this Y chromosome around the world from different peoples. And they came to the conclusion that all men alive today descend from one male ancestor. And they even call him Y chromosome Adam. Not that they believe in the biblical Adam per se, but I still think it's a pretty good name. I would have been even more chuffed if they called him Y chromosome Noah. You can ask me about it later if you're not following. But the journalists, in this case Sandy Fleming, they write about these Y chromosome things. So the Y chromosome may be a symbol of masculinity, but it is becoming increasingly clear that it is anything but strong and enduring. What's more, the Y chromosome has, there's that word again, degenerated rapidly. So it's all downhill. The scientists know it, the reporters know it, but it's not on the mainstream media. In comes the evolutionary biology expert, I should say, Richard Boggs. And he brings these things together, these Y chromosome, Adam and mitochondrial Eve. And he says, well, the question has moved on from this Adam and Eve bottleneck. That means a very limited amount of people. Is it inconsistent with human genetic diversity data? The question has moved on to, at what time scale could an Adam and Eve bottleneck be consistent? So yes, it is consistent, but when? Now, interestingly enough, he puts Adam and Eve together in that sentence. But the evolutionists would tell you, although that Adam and Eve could live thousands of miles apart and they could be separated by time by thousands of years. But he puts them together. I find that interesting. But when did these people live then? Well, in comes Mark Thomas from University College, not far up the road, London, and he says the following. We only have to go back a few thousand years before we reach somebody who's the ancestor of everybody alive today. Did you clock that? A few thousand years. He's an evolutionist. Now, evolutionists do have an uncanny habit of changing their minds because new data comes in, doesn't really fit with evolution, so they have to change their narrative a bit. One thing remains true for them. Evolution is true and biblical creation is not, but that's another matter. But let's talk a little bit about evolution, and natural selection and genetics can come in handy. So I'm going to use a simplified illustration to give you a bit of idea what natural selection is and what it's not. So here we have two dogs. They have hair, and they have a piece of information called an allele for the gene that makes the hair. So you have one allele from the father, one allele from the mother, and both of them have one allele that codes for short hair and one allele that codes for very long fur. And in this case, that means that they have medium length hair. Now these dogs, they have puppies, and one of their puppies will inherit the short hair allele from both mom and dad. And this dog will have very short hair indeed. Twice as many puppies will inherit a short hair allele from one parent and a long hair allele from the other parent, and they look the same as their parents. They have medium length hair. Now the last puppy will inherit the long hair allele from both its parents, and it looks a bit like a fuzzball. Now, imagine that you have some dog-like creatures coming off from one place in the world. Let's call it Ararat for the sake of argument. And these dogs, they walk about, they have some puppies, those walk about, they have some puppies, and so on and so on. And some of those dogs will venture up very much to the northern parts of the globe, where you see those white bits, where it is indeed very cold. Regrettably, the dogs that have very short or medium length hair, they don't do so well and they freeze to death. But the ones that have very long hair, they are very suited for this particular environment and they thrive. And they go out dancing, if you like, and they have some puppies of their own. And can you imagine what their puppies look like? They all look like their parents because what? Their parents can only give the puppies the information for long hair. Now, some people call this, rightfully so, natural selection. Yes. They might call it speciation. I'm quite happy with that because you have a great variety to very specific hair length. This is variation within a kind. That's a term that we biblical creationists could use. In fact, it was a creationist who started talking about natural selection before Darwin ever did, but that's a side issue. But notice one thing that's crucial. Has any new information arisen in the dog population? No. Has information been lost in this generation? Well, yes, because the short hair allele, the dogs that carry that, they all froze to death, and dead dogs don't have puppies. So this is a loss of information. Evolutionists will give you example time and time again of something like this, and then they say, see, change, that's evolution. But be careful, nothing new has been developed. There was always dogs that could have long hair, in my example. Now, no longer can they have short hair. You can have short hair again, but you would need to import some dogs with short hair genetic information and send them with some knitted jumpers because it's going to get really cold. That's the only way to bring back the short hair information. But I got to carry on. You didn't come here for dogs, you came for human beings. Here we see a cartoon of Adam and Eve at the top there. Adam and Eve were mid-brown when you look at their skin complex. I'm going to not be using the term skin color because we all have the same color of skin. We all have the same pigment. It's called melanin. Some people have lots of it. Other people have very little of it, yet others have somewhere in between of it, and that's the whole thing. We all have the same skin color. But let's say that these letters that you see there represent the genetic information for the tone of their skin color. Sorry, I said skin color there, for the tone of their skin. So let's say that a capital letter represents more dark, and lowercase letters means lighter. And so you can pick letters from Adam and Eve together and you can get all sorts of combinations ranging from quite light to quite dark. Now, here it's a little bit more professionally represented in what's called a Punnett square. You have a mid-brown mother and a mid-brown father, and the same principle with the letters. You can get all sorts of combinations and all sorts of different tones of skin. And you might think, well, Lucian, that's great, you make fantastic cartoons and Punnett squares, but what about real life? We want real examples. Okay, here you see two girls that are good friends. In fact, I hope they are good friends. And some people might say, well, that's nice, they're friends, two different races being friends. That's what we need in this world. Well, are they? Because these two girls are not just any girls, they're sisters. In fact, they're twin sisters. Here you see them at much younger age with mum and dad. Notice, for instance, that mum and dad are mid-brown. They are carriers of all sorts of genetic information, just like the cartoon that I showed you 2 slides ago. Notice also that the girl on the right is not white at all. Because if she was white, you couldn't see her. Because the background is white. She is light brown, very light pinkish brown. Similarly, the lady on the top right, in my opinion, she's not black because you couldn't see her, because the background I've colored black. The only way that this would work is that guy on the bottom right, if he'd been dead for about a week, he would be a lot whiter. Maybe then it would apply. But this is the thing. We talk about race. Now let's think about that for a little bit, taking these two twins. They spent approximately 9 months in the same womb and came out of that womb probably a few minutes apart. In my view, I would like to ask a question, how can they possibly be a different race? They are the same race. They are the human race. Now, I had to review a book, and I found it very interesting by Angela Saini. She's very clever. She's an evolutionist, but she is a very clever cookie. And she said in her book, color takes on a new subtlety when every degree of pigmentation matters. You see, we people, we are taught almost from very early age to look at the outside. We're good at judging books by their covers, aren't we? Well, I am. And we have an opinion ready before we even get to meet somebody properly. But you know, I think God rebukes us. He certainly did to Samuel. Let me read that passage from 1 Samuel 16:7, where remember when Samuel was to anoint the new king, and he was to go to Jesse, and Jesse paraded his sons in front of Samuel, and Samuel thought, oh, well, surely this is the man. Eliab, I believe it was. This is the man. He's going to be the king. And at that point, God steps in, and he says this, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. That's what we need to do. We need to look at people's heart. What do they believe? What do they say? What do they think? What they look like is mostly irrelevant, whether they have no hair or glasses or maybe a bit of a belly. It's not really that important. Evolution is not the root of all trouble. Sin is, of course, but evolution's teaching, I think, has not really helped. In fact, I think it's made things worse. We're going to talk briefly about eugenics. What is eugenics? That's a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population by excluding certain genetic groups judged to be inferior and promoting other genetic groups judged to be superior. Now I'm going to do that mind-reading thing again, because some of you are thinking, hang on a second, who's doing the judging? Precisely, who is doing the judging? We are not supposed to be each other's judge. God is our judge, but there are plenty of people that judge others. Some people associate this with the fascism. We associate eugenics today with the fascists who perpetrated the Holocaust, and rightfully so. That was wrong, and it was eugenics. But before the 1930s, when Hitler became in power, many saw it as socially acceptable. Not just over there in Germany, but also here in Britain. To systematically improve the quality of the British race. Darwin said that humans are animals like any other animal, and his cousin Francis Galton, who was a biologist, said, well, if that's the case, we can breed them better. He's talking about people, breeding people. Racism, of course, very much happening and talked about these days. This is Stephen Jay Gould. He used to be Harvard American paleontologist. He said, biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, so that was the decade that Darwin's Origin of Species came out. But they increased by orders of magnitude following the acceptance of evolutionary theory. Cold, dispassionate, objective modern science shows us that races can be ranked on a scale of superiority. If this offends Christian morality or a sentimental belief in human unity, so be it. Science must be free to proclaim unpleasant truths. Ha. Well, I do happen to agree with that last sentence. Science must be free to proclaim unpleasant truths. However, do I think that this is good science? Not at all. Evolutionary theory, in my view, is rubbish science. Now, this was from the year 1977, which was otherwise a good year because I was born. But what's happening more recently? Well, this is Luis Quintana Murci. He says that racism has no genetic basis. And there's going to be a tricky word. I'll explain what that is. He says the genes that explains the phenotypic difference between populations only represent a tiny part of our genome. Now, what is a phenotype? Well, I taught you earlier on about the genotype, the genetic makeup that we find in trillions and trillions of cells. The phenotype is essentially how that genetic information is expressed. Essentially, it's what you look at in the mirror in the morning. That's the phenotype, how it looks, what it looks like. But these phenotypic differences, be it the tone of your skin, be it the shape of your eyes, or you name it, he says, are a tiny part of our genome, and it is very small. Confirming once again that the concept of race, from a genetic standpoint, has been abolished. Now this is in 2008, so this is finally science catching up with the Bible, because the Bible has taught that we came from one man and one woman to begin with. But why is there still racism? I don't think we have to argue that there's still a problem. I go back to Angela Saini and her book, and this quote, she nails it. This is absolutely spot on, I believe. So she says, those committed to the biological reality of race, they won't back down if the data proves them wrong. Oh no, they will simply keep reaching for fresher, more elaborate theories when the old ones fail. All this to prove what they have always really wanted to know, is that they are superior. And there you have it. Does the Bible have anything to say about pride? I think it does. People wanting to think that they are the best thing since sliced bread. And how do you do that? Elevate yourself, put others down. That's what it's about. So what's the answer to that? Well, we've got to go back to the beginning. God says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female. And the New Testament repeats once again, he made from one man, that is Adam, every nation of mankind. Jesus, when he was walking around, he was often pestered by those Pharisees, and one time he got challenged on the topic of marriage. Actually, it was more divorce. And Jesus answered the Pharisees by quoting, going back to Genesis 1 and 2. From the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. And he gives there essentially the layout for what a marriage is. And that brings us full circle to what we started our presentation off with tonight. Can you marry your relation? If you are married or planning to marry, and you're not marrying your relation, or you haven't married your relation, I don't know what you've married, but it isn't a human being. You have to marry your relation, because we all go back to Adam and Eve. So I have a few minutes, I caught up a little bit. What about human evolution? Because this symbol, this progression icon, you still see frequently. Did we evolve from ape-like creatures? Haven't missing links been found? And what about those Neanderthals? Well, this is just one depiction. There are many examples. Here's an early one from 1939. Looks a bit different, but it goes all the way back to the fishy stage. Here's a more recent one. This was in a book from Clark Howell, Early Man. And with only two exceptions, Dryopithecus and Solomon, each link in this progression is drawn taller. This is not due to fossil or other empirical evidence, but rather a result of artistic license. Say what? This is not science. This is somebody good with pencil and paper. Artistic license. Although proto-apes and apes were quadrupedal, that means they go on all fours, all are shown here standing, for purpose of comparison, of course. Some of them were physically unable to stand erect. Furthermore, they were drawn walking. Yeah, boss, but this guy can't stand. Oh, be quiet. Draw him standing. In fact, draw him walking on too. That's even better. Why? Well, we got to sell this propaganda and this magazine. We've got to make money and indoctrinate the people with false teaching. Because that's what it is. It's not science. It's artistic license and, quite frankly, fraud. To draw something standing when it can't physically stand. That's not science. That's deceit. What do evolutionists think about this progression icon? Well, there's 4 top-class evolutionists I'll quote to you. This was Harvard's Stephen Jay Gould. He says, March of Progress, my books are dedicated to debunking this picture of evolution. Then you've got Bernard Wood, who was more than 30 years in human evolution-related research. And he said, there's a popular image of human evolution that you'll see all over the place. On the left, an ape. On the right, a man. Between the two, a succession of figures that become ever more like humans. Our progress from ape to human looks so smooth, so tidy. It's such a beguiling image that even the experts are loath to let it go, but it is an illusion. Henry Gee, senior editor of a very prestigious journal called Nature, said, "We have all seen the canonical parade of apes, each one becoming more human. We know that as a depiction of evolution, this lineup is tosh. Yet we cling to it." And then lastly, I want to tell you, Tim White, he was involved with a missing link called Lucy. And he said, "The familiar iconography of an evolutionary march to modern man has been proven wrong for more than 60 years. And that quote is 11 years ago, so I could almost make it 70 years. 4 top-class evolutionists, and Philip and I, we could produce more than these 4, but marching on. The progression icon that is more realistic, truthful, is this progression icon. And most of the change that we see is to do with size and hair. And I'm a living example because I used to have a six-pack and I used to have hair, but no longer. But in all seriousness, as I said at the beginning, all of us are going to die, providing Jesus doesn't come back, but hopefully he will soon. But maybe a tombstone will have 2 years. One is the year that you were born, or me, and the year that you died. And in between the hyphen, that hyphen would then represent our lives, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be much better for us to use that hyphen to glorify the Creator, believe Him for the words that He's given us in the English language? Thank God that we have a Bible in the English language. Or are we going to believe the lie based on poor science, artistic license, and whatnot? You have to make that decision. I would suggest choose wisely. So concluding, our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents were not ape-like creatures at all. No, we all go back to Adam and Eve. All people are one human family. I hate to inform you, but I am part of your family. And you can send me 47 birthday cakes. I'll give you my address later. That was a joke. We are all devolving. What I mean with that is we're all going downhill, not just the aging process, but generation upon generation will carry more genetic copying mistakes than the generation before it. That's a fact that evolutionists and creationists agree on. And that has been accumulating for hundreds of generations. But the most important, we are all sinners, and we are all in need of a Savior. Some closing comments, especially about you, but this applies to me too. You were a human being from the moment of conception. David writes in Psalm 51, "Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me." So a fertilized egg is a human being, whilst at the same time a sinner. Now it gets a bit strange because this is now beyond my understanding. Prior to that, and this goes back to God speaking to Jeremiah, prior to that you were a person. God said to Jeremiah, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you." All right, that's a bit difficult for me, I admit. Of course, God knows each and every one of us from before the foundation of the earth. And maybe cliche-like, He has a plan for all of us. It's our task to try and find out what that path is that He wants us to walk and plead with Him to help us to walk in it. We were all made in God's image. Every single human being, even the vilest criminal, is made in God's image. So I've come to the end of my presentation, just within the 60 minutes. A few resources I would like to promote you can take advantage of. The first one, in a minute or two, Philip will pass more clipboards around, but the Creation magazine has been our flagship for coming up for 47 years now. So magazine has gone into over 100 countries quarterly. It's a family magazine, so the magazine is laid out beautifully in color. We've got some fresh scientific articles that we put a few comments on per page. In the middle there's a section geared towards the children. We've got always stuff on animals. The megalodon, I'm sure that children especially will be fascinated by this sizable shark-like creature. There's sometimes articles on topics from the Bible. So this time there's an article about 5 things that you may not have known about Enoch. We get people write in, as I said before, but also people writing in that they became a Christian. A few months ago, Philip and I and the team in the office got an email from somebody who read the gospel in the magazine, because each magazine has a gospel on some page or another. And he read it and he prayed and he became a believer. Children love it too. It equips them to recognize false science or bad science, like I've shown you a few examples. And if you are a family and you don't want to fight over who gets to read it first, may I recommend you could get it digitally as well, so you can get it up to 5 devices. So in a moment you'll see a form like this. If you want to try this out, or even if you already subscribe and you want to extend it, we'll have some presents for you. You can get, everyone who does that tonight can get a back issue with this beautiful pelican on it. All of the subscribers would also get a copy of the book Evolutionists Say the Oddest Things. And if you try it for 2 years, you can have a DVD or a download. And the DVD, that we have a handful of choices that you can choose from. So Philip, if you don't mind passing around the clipboard, if you want to do this, fill out your form, take it at the end. If you don't want to do this, pass it on to your neighbor, no hard feelings. So while the clipboards go round, we have a website, the most difficult to remember URL in the world ever, creation.com. There's a little booklet that talks about some of the things I've been saying. What does the Bible really say about Adam and Eve? If you're not a reader, a DVD with Carl Wieland covers very similar ground. We have books for children, more on that table over there. This one is about the Table of Nations, because it turns out many people have written about creation and about the flood, but not that many on the Table of Nations. So, and of course a hot topic is the transgender debates that we seem to be having. So thank you for your time. I've been told that if there are any questions, we can do a few questions tonight. So if you have any questions, this would be a good time. I should have maybe prepared you beforehand. The silliest question is the one not asked. Okay, that's fine. Philip and I will be around, so if you want to chat with us, do come and see us. Have a look at the materials. On the pew, the last pew there's also some free leaflets that you can just take, read, and share with others. So thank you for your time. I'll hand back to the pastor. Thank you.